Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and there were many heroes who fought in World War II, and many were Jewish. But very few of their names do we know. Fred Hausman is a name you should know. Fred was a Jew living in what was then known as Palestine, who fought in the British Army and would become the British Army's highest decorated World War II Palestinian soldier, winning the Distinguished Conduct Medal. On this edition of L'Chaim, I am honored to be joined by Fred Hausman's son, Eric Hausman-Houston, who is a successful playwright, having written Becoming Adele and Sweet Deliverance. And Eric is a wonderful author who's now written a fascinating novel entitled The Lost Artist, which is based on the true story of his father. And Eric, it is wonderful to have you joining us. You wrote a wonderful book. You have a fabulous story. It's lovely having you here at the L'Chaim table.
It's great being here. Thank you.
So much I want to ask you, and I want at some point to ask about you, but I first want to understand who your father was. And The Lost Artist, and you say this at the very beginning of the book, it's a novel based on a true story. So as I'm looking at this book, I'm trying to understand how much of it is literal, true, and how much of it is what Isaac Bashevis Singer said was your imagination. How much of this is true?
I try to keep it as true as possible.
Mm-hmm. Are the names accurate?
All the names that I knew, I mean, he had friends that I didn't know their names. A few I did know. Jack Rosenstein, towards the end, he was real. But there were, a lot of the kids in the opening, he told me about the stories. So I had to make up dialogue characters.
Very good. Okay.
But it is as true as I could make it.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to identify for our viewers some of the characters that are in your book. Then I'll ask you questions.
Okay.
Okay? I'm going to name characters. Who's Fritz?
Well, Fritz, believe it or not, is my father, but I didn't know his name was Fritz.
Really?
Until in 2004 when I talked him into telling his story. And he didn't want to do it. He said...
you always knew him as Fred?
Always Fred. I didn't know he was Chaim. I didn't know he was Fritz. He didn't want to talk about that time. He would tell us war stories and the fun stuff. He would tell me about Amman, the horse, which, I mean, that was all true. He was a gift of King Abdullah of Jordan to Haim al-Asraf. Al-Asraf was assassinated, and the widow didn't know what to do with this horse, and she donated him to the school, and nobody could touch him. And my father saw this beautiful horse, and he loved animals. He went out to the field, and the horse was so friendly and playing. And then this farmer said, "Get away from that horse. He's a killer." And the horse started attacking the farmer. So I don't know what happened, why he connected with my father, but I think he saw the awe on my father's face. And my father was 13 at the time.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that horse saved his life. If it hadn't been for that horse, I doubt he would have met King Abdullah, and he wouldn't have had his protection. And he wouldn't have been on the third line because he was crazy. He was always trying to get on the first line.
Explain what third line and first line are.
I'm sorry. At El Alamein, and people...
This is when he's in the actual British Army.
This is when he was in the British 8th Army. This is before the commandos. So in 1942, at El Alamein, that's 60 miles to the west of Alexandria, the Nazis had won the war. They just didn't know it.
You write that, by the way, the very first page of your book.
Yeah.
The Nazis had won the war, they just didn't know it. We will take a digression for a moment. What do you mean by that?
That they were 60 miles from Alexandria, 65. They had hundreds of tanks. history was rewritten by the victors for good reason, and I would have also. My father was on the third line. The first two lines were wiped out. If the Nazis broke through, they would have gotten the Suez Canal, completely cut off the British. They were already on rationing and ready to revolt as it was. They would have gotten all the Saudi oil fields because the Arabs were so sympathetic to the Nazis. They believed Hitler, the man of the people, was going to save them from the British, elitists who looked down on them and treated them like second-class citizens.
And the Jews.
And, oh yeah. The Mussolini had gone to Alexandria with his Charger, white Charger, for the victory parade through Cairo. He had 200 cans of black shoe polishes. They had won the war. They were celebrating in Berlin having won the war. There was nothing to stop them. There was a third line, and my father said, and I've heard this from other soldiers on that line, they had nothing. He was the driver of their only tank on that northern line, and he had 6 shells for the gun of their tank, and that was it. There weren't bullets. They had let out people from the hospital, secretaries, chefs with knives, but they had no bullets. And then they saw hundreds of tanks. I probably shouldn't tell the ending of the book. I mean, this is part 1.
Go ahead.
Okay. But
I mean, this is history here.
it is, and it's
Yes.
important history that people don't know because it had to be
exactly
rewritten.
right. Go ahead.
So they saw hundreds of tanks coming at them.
And again, just so our viewers follow, the they is?
My father, the Allies, the British, and the Australian. There were so many Indian regiments. He fought with them all. And even the Indian regiments, they couldn't use the same bathrooms as the British. And same with the Jews. And my father didn't experience that, but he knows the Indian regiment told him that. And he experienced that when he was training in Sarafan. So there was a real class distinction, and there was reason to not like the British. Mm-hmm. My father hated the British in Palestine. He said everybody did. And then the soldiers he fought with, he loved. They were like brothers, and they were nothing like that. And he really felt there were 2 different groups of British, the real people and these,
Yes.
imperialists.
Yes. Okay, so here he is, part of this line, the third line, and?
The first 2 lines were wiped out. He saw Australian soldiers holding on to bombs, jumping on tanks to stop it and blowing themselves up, just doing whatever they could. Those first 2 lines were wiped out. They saw hundreds of tanks coming. They all knew they were going to die. As soon as they fired 1 shot, with 6 shells, you may take out 1 or 2 tanks at the most. But as soon as they fired, that would be it. They would know they have 1 tank and nothing else, and they would have annihilated it. And they would have known how weak that line was. But they all stood there. None of them ran. Everybody had gone at that point. They saw convoys of people leaving, and they were left there, but they had to do what they could. And it must have looked like a very impressive line. That many guys were willing to stand there and die to do whatever they could to stop the Nazis from getting through. But then he said, just as they were boarding, they saw 1 tank stop, and then another, and another, and they realized they were all running out of gas. And instead of getting off of the tanks and just wiping them out and driving to Alexandria for all the oil and gas they needed, they turned around. And my father never understood it, and I don't think any of those soldiers knew what happened. They thought it was a miracle because Rommel, the Desert Fox, the greatest Nazi general, knew every move they were going to make up to then.
And what about the horse? You said the horse saved your father's life.
Oh, only because if he hadn't met King Abdullah, and I don't know that he would have if he hadn't.
Yes.
That horse was his best friend. He was somewhat of an outsider in Palestine. He was at Ben Shaman Youth Village. And a lot of the kids there had family that were working kibbutz, and they were working from day to night, and the kids would have no upbringing if they weren't at Ben Shaman. But my father was a little more of a refugee. Actually, his father had been very wealthy in Germany and refused to leave. But in Ben Shaman, if you were there without your parents, you were sort of like an orphan. And he never really understood that, but he had enough hard time in Bingen with, he had his gang of friends, and he was the last Jewish boy to be in the school because of his friends protecting him. Every time he fought with a Nazi kid, they would surround him, so it was a 1-on-1 fight. And he learned to fight. He would take off his father's World War I belt, wrap it around. And he said sometimes they got the better of him, but he usually got the better of them, and they learned to respect him. He learned you had to fight, stand your ground. And he said that, the kids there in Ben Shaman, they were a different Jew that he hadn't known. They were not going to, be rolled over. They were going to fight. They were going to make their stand. And I think that's part of what happened with Israel. How they could win is that there were so many young people that went there. And after what they experienced, they weren't going to just stand and be rolled over. And it made a big difference.
All right, your point is it was through the relationship he had with his best friend, which was a horse.
Oh, yeah.
He gets to meet King Abdullah.
Well, he went off alone at the age of 14 to unite the Jews and the Arabs.
He did.
Which was considered kind of crazy. And obviously wasn't what the school would allow. But it's amazing the liberty he was allowed. When we went, he met Tito. He became friends with Tito through King Abdullah when he was in the commandos, and Tito really protected him. Abdullah was trying to keep him alive. He thought he would help unite the Jews and the Arabs. So he went off alone to Lida, which is now Lod, and in Lida, people would throw rocks at the Jewish buses going through. But he never felt any animosity. He was an artist, and the first time he took a bus, he started drawing the people. I mean, he was only 14, so he was a kid also. And he became friends with them. They were mostly illiterate farmers or workers. And they were very protective, and he really felt that most Jews and Arabs at that time wanted to work together. But then you had the Grand Mufti, and it was just hate, kill every Jew. And then you had Ben Gurion, who wasn't going to work with the Grand Mufti.
Could he have?
I don't know, and my father never knew if he could, but he didn't try. He spoke 11 languages, but he didn't learn Palestinian Arabic. And he probably was right. There was probably no hope with the Grand Mufti. But that's part two anyway.
Yes.
But so he made these Arab friends, and they took him, or one of them, he went to Jaffa. He met these guys in a cafe, and they would argue about politics. And one day, the owner of the cafe took him to this room in the back. He said, there's a gentleman who would like to meet with you. And he didn't even know he was meeting King Abdullah.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And how much, King Abdullah had an impact in his life. If it hadn't been for that, I doubt very much he would have lived. A Jew in the British Army was not given any preferential treatment, but with King Abdullah behind you. He never really believed that. He thought he was just lucky.
Mm-hmm. As I hear the story, we have to start at the beginning. Your father was born in Germany.
Yeah.
We now know his real name was Fritz, or his German name was Fritz. He becomes Fred later.
Yeah.
And you describe in the book, although I don't want to use the book necessarily, ultimately your father comes to Palestine, and he comes alone. Is that correct?
He left in 1934. His parents refused to leave. His sister...
Did he ever talk to you about that?
Yeah, in the video, I got 4 hours, and I didn't know my grandmother died in Auschwitz till 2004, the fall of 2004, when I taped the video. He just didn't talk about that. I knew it was something not to bring up. I don't think any of us can understand what it was like to go through that war. And I know my mother said she met him when she was 20. He was 28 in New York. That must have been around 1949, 50. They went to a movie, and there was an old newsreel in there, and something happened. He went out into the lobby and sat down on the floor and was catatonic. And she was young. She didn't know what to do. And he was a big guy. He was 6'2.5", and had been a commando. And, but he snapped out of it, and he never talked about it. But obviously, there was a lot there. I mean, I know some of the stories that...
What do you guess it was?
In that newsreel?
And that's not necessarily literally, but what type of thing do you think it was?
He saw his best friend flying through the air with his legs blown off. He carried him to the medics. This is during the battle. And he could have lived. And he was supposed to live without legs. And the medics gave him morphine, and then they marked it to let other ones know that he had morphine. And Johnny, he was a British cop, probably my father's age, around 22, 23. He kept wiping the mark off. So they kept giving him more till he died. And then my father, he carried him through the town. And I'm sorry, I'm a little crazy. When I'm writing these characters, I feel like I get to know them. They become a part of me. But he carried them through the town. He said all the people were lined up crying, and he carried them to the grave. And like Jack died in his arms, the little blonde kid that was Rosenstein, I think he saw guys being killed. Mm-hmm. And it may have been somebody he knew or looked like somebody he knows. That's all I can guess.
Mm-hmm. You never recover from that.
You know, I got to hand it to my father. Maybe we're crazy, but he really lived in the moment. He had a great life. He was successful as a commercial artist. He was a really upcoming artist in the 1960s, 3 shows. And he didn't look back. He didn't talk about it, and he really embraced life. I know other people who were really destroyed by that war, and he wasn't. He really, he wanted to go to the end. At 76, he had been successful, but he was really bad with money. If he made money, he spent it. And he had lost, most of his friends retired. He didn't have much business in the commercial art world. And he learned computers at 76 years old because he had to do, and he got somebody to help him. He paid him, and then he kept trying to get jobs, and he ended up being the artistic director at GAF Corporation. He called, a guy was nice enough to talk to him, and he said, "You've been so nice, I'll give you a free job. What do you need?" And he said, "Well, we can use a new logo." And he said, "You've got it." The next day they had it, loved it. And then another, so what now? And so for the last 10 years, that saved him. But he loved it. He drove an hour and a half from Stamford, Connecticut to Wayne, New Jersey every day until he died 2 days shy of 85. The Friday before, he died on a Monday. The Friday before he drove to work. He wasn't feeling well, he drove back. He thought he was going to live, he was told 6 months, but he took a medication that could have given him a year and a half, and he had a bad reaction and died from that, which no one was ready for. But I'm glad he didn't have to go through that debilitating death, because he was really vital to the end. And so yeah, people were destroyed by that war, but he had a really good life. Mm-hmm. I would say that was the biggest victory.
Mm-hmm. Good for him. And you were lucky to have him as a father. Okay, so your father leaves Germany for Palestine because his father's doing so well. Whatever frightened some Jews didn't frighten your grandfather. And so Fred comes to Palestine. And you describe his arriving in the book. I don't know, again, whether it's imagination or it's literal, doesn't matter.
It's kind of like he described it to me.
Okay.
I mean, I had to make up dialogue and stuff,
It's not about I'm not asking that. I'm talking about, is the timeline and the facts that you present fairly much what you understand happened to your father? Because
of that 4-hour video, I have those facts, and I really stuck to it.
Okay.
I didn't want to change anything like that. But,
okay.
In fact, the most unreal stuff is the truth.
What do you mean?
Well, a few people questioned whether he would go off alone at the age of 14 to meet with Arabs. That was true. My father was nuts. But he was a kid. I've tried to make it real. I wouldn't write that in fiction. It would be unbelievable. In fact, his whole story, it's pretty incredible. I don't know if it would be believable. The whole third line, what happened, the way he survived the Battle of Knightsbridge, where they were just he was a lead tank, and he survived, which is a miracle, because that was one of the bloodiest battles ever. That was all true. That's just what happened.
What do you think it was inside your father that made him, as a 14-year-old, want to build bridges to the Arab community that was living in Palestine?
I really believe it was because his father was a business and rigid. He was so opposite my father. My father he loved art and nature, and he was gung-ho to be a farmer and studied botany. And his father had been through World War I, the Great War, in the trenches for 4 years, fought for Germany, and his business, he had built a successful vineyard. He was a wine distributor, and he was an important man in the town, and he was protecting himself. He wasn't going to go back to those trenches. And he would pay somebody to wind the clocks. He wouldn't just do that himself. He was a man of leisure, and, well, not leisure, he was a businessman. He worked. And my father, I think, he wanted his parents out of there. He understood how bad things were in Germany and where it was going to go, where his father just couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. He was older, and more set in his ways, and to start over in a new land was inconceivable for him. And to dig ditches and that kind of stuff, it just wasn't for him. But if my father could have made Palestine an area good enough and peaceful enough, I mean, his whole point was to being there was to get his parents there.
Your father cared about his Arab neighbors, yes?
Yeah.
Did he ever talk to you in general about his philosophy of Israel? And when you hear people say, you know, the Jews took the land from the Arabs, did you ever hear your father address that question?
Well, with the Grand Mufti petitioning all the nations to use Hitler's final solution on the Jews, unless the friends that he had, Arab friends, were willing to assassinate the Grand Mufti, I don't know what else could have been done. He really wanted King Abdullah to take Palestine into Jordan. Abdullah would have given Israel its own republic, and there would be peaceful borders. And that would have been great. But King Abdullah was murdered by Arabs. My father was probably going to be assassinated by Jews because he wanted unity. And there were some crazy Jews that after World War II, they didn't want any risk of that. That would be part two. But he was very proud of Israel when he went there to see where it had come. And it was actually what the Jews were doing there in the beginning. I talk about that in this, with Tel Aviv and the Bauhaus, and I mean how much the Jews had done in Israel at that time. Rothschild, what he did, bringing the first power plants, what they were doing for water, what they've done for water now, it's really incredible. It can help change the world. Peaceful borders would be incredible.
Okay. Explain to our viewers, how does he end up not first in the British Army? Your father's involved in various paramilitary Israeli operations. And
he was in the Haganah when he was 15.
Exactly.
And he saved, I don't know how many Jews. That was what he did. He had a few missions with the British, and they were pretty horrible. He had told me something about it, but then I did more research. And the British atrocities to the Arabs at that time were really not much different than the Nazi atrocities to the Jews, up to the point of the gas chambers. But until '39, it was pretty horrendous. Victors write the history, so we don't get taught all of that. But it's there. I mean, I was able to find so much on it.
What do you mean the British were inflicting atrocities on the Arabs?
Well, innocent Arabs, anything they wanted, they could use arms search to destroy the homes. If they find out any Arab insurgents, they would take in censorship, anything. They weren't given freedom of speech. They weren't allowed to use phone calls. Their homes were being destroyed. Anything. 12 Arabs were taken, put into a cage for several days and weren't given enough water, and they all died. And the British said it was because of the unusual heat and the older age of the men. Well, they were put in a cage without water outside in the desert, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's in the book, but there's a lot that I didn't put in.
How were the British to the Jews?
They weren't as bad, but they did treat them as second-class citizens. My father hated the British. He always said, I hated the British, but I hated the Nazis a lot more. And then he found out when he went in the British Army, how good the British the people. It's a whole different thing.
Okay.
And I think a lot of nice British guys went to Palestine working, and they were indoctrinated. They were taught, you do this. This is how you break up the homes, and you just get used to it, and you do it.
Okay. When he talked to you about his experiences in the Haganah, what was the feel of it for you? What was he trying to convey to you? What was it like for him?
I think it was an adventure.
Yes.
I think he told me about the one boat. He swam out there without a life jacket to save them. And he could have gotten a life jacket on there, but he didn't. He thought it might weigh him down or something. He was just a kid. He was like 16 at the time. So he almost drowned. But it was that kind of just naivete. And he always asked me, or told me he didn't know why he did it, but there was a water tower that they irrigated the fields with, and he would swim underwater back and forth. And he would do it for he kept pushing it. Every day he would do that. And he didn't know why he did that, but it ended up saving his life a few times. He was on the Arampora. It went down in record time. Most people think everybody died on that boat. This is part 2. It's not in this part. But he was sick below deck, and his teacher, Melnick, said, you have to go up on deck and see the medic, because he had a bad cold. In fact, Jack Rosenstein, he got it from him, from nursing him, because he really wanted to go with them. And he was devastated that he couldn't because of the cold, and my father was trying to get him better. He got really sick on the boat. So he went up to see the medic, and at that moment, the Nazis started bombing. And they were ordered to run below deck, and instead he ran and got a machine gun and started firing at them, and he said, suddenly he was in the water. It was so fast. And he had to swim for 4 hours, and there was a guy, all the convoy went by. They were the lead ship, the Arampora. And there's a monument to this ship in Israel, and that's why people think everybody died on it. He was one of the few that survived, but he swam 4 hours, and this was, I think, April or May, so the Mediterranean was cold, and it was at night, like 1 in the morning to 5 in the morning. It was still dark when he made it to this Greek vessel. He saw something on the horizon. He didn't know if it was an island or a ship, and this guy had broken his legs, and he was moaning. And he said, leave me, I'm going to die. And he said, no, get on my back, we'll find something to float on. And there was nothing. And he just swam for 4 hours.
With this guy on his back?
And the guy was whining the whole time, and he kept swearing at him to shut up, or, he'll kill him myself. And he said that kept him going, fighting with the guy the whole way. And he made it to the ship, and there were all these Greek sailors on the ropes. And they pulled the guy off him, and he went into bad cramps and sank. And the guy in the dark water jumped in and grabbed him. They had to jump up and down on his legs. And that's how he survived, but his other friends, they all went down. So it was hard for him. And then he went back to Palestine having, it wasn't like, yeah, I made it. Your brothers have all just drowned. I mean, these were people he was really close to. So that's why to me it always seems like a miracle when I hear these stories, and I know they're true. That's just what had to happen, or how else would he have survived the Arampora? And he was definitely on it. It's, that's on record. But to him, it was never that he was lucky. He would say, I'm just lucky, but it was hard to be happy about something. I think the ones who survive feel a guilt because of all these other great guys who, are gone.
The Haganah was originally formed to protect the Chalutzim, the pioneers, were building the kibbutzim and ultimately the cities of Israel. At the same time, they were often attacked, and they had trouble with the British. And when your father described his life in the Haganah, was he mainly talking about defensive actions, or did he tell you that the Haganah went out and either struck at the British or at Arabs?
It got to a point during the Arab Revolt between 36 and 39 where the British took the Haganah, and they used him for some of those Arab attacks, when they took innocent Arabs and, just destroyed their homes to find out any information they could. Took all their civil liberties away. And fortunately, he was in school, and, his teacher said he can't do that, he can't be out that late. So he ended up taking in what he called Yalam. And I've heard that a few places, but it's really Aliyah Bet, illegal immigrants, the Jews that were refugees. A lot came on land, but a lot came on boats too. They had a few big boats of a few hundred, and I think one sank. And then they were mostly boats of about 30 or 40 people. And that was mostly what he did, and it was always at night. He said when you're doing a maneuver, you do it at night. You can disappear in a brush, and no one will see you. In daylight, everybody sees you.
Did he ever talk to you about the Irgun? And there were times, very tragic times, when there actually was enmity of a physical nature between the Haganah and the Irgun. And Ben-Gurion and Begin were seen almost as enemies. Yeah. How did your father feel about Begin and the Irgun?
I don't think he was a big fan of the Irgun. I don't know. We didn't talk about that much. But he was part of the Palmach. He wasn't for violence. He wanted to make peace. He wanted people to live together. He didn't want everything he had been going through. He didn't enjoy fighting in the war. He thought the Arabs and Jews could make a great land together. And it was sad that it couldn't go that way.
Mm-hmm. So how does he end up in the British Army?
Well, he right away enlisted, but he was turned down. And he found out only later from his friend Yvonne Sachs that Lehman, Professor Lehman, who ran Ben Shem in the youth village that saved my father, and if I ever get a stolen medal back, I think we'd like to donate it to that school, and they can sell it to a museum in Jerusalem that has all his drawings and stuff. But Lehman stopped him from going into Haganah. Lehman prevented my father and Melnick, his professor, from going into the army so that he could keep them there to protect the school, because at that point, the school didn't have enough protection, and there were Arab insurgents attacking it. So he fired 10 of his kids, or a dozen of the boys that were working there, so that he promised the British, I'll give you 10 soldiers for these two. And my father finally found that out. I guess a new guy was on, and Lehman and my father were able to enlist, but that was until 40 or 41. Mm-hmm. No, actually late 40.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if there was a specific reason he was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal?
Well, the citation's in there. It's at the end in the stolen medal part, because D&W put the citation in the auction listing and then this ridiculous provenance that couldn't possibly be true. But yeah, he led, his commanding officer, Mad Jack Churchill, who was not related to Winston Churchill, but when he was captured, well, I'll get back to that. He said that my father volunteered to lead every mission. My father said, Jack said, who's going to volunteer with Fred? He never asked him. He just assumed. So I guess he did volunteer just involuntarily. And it was a few missions. I mean, he did so many, but one he took a Nazi stronghold, a house, single-handedly. His guys were pinned down with machine guns, and he shot one of the guys, ran forward, another one ran inside. He was able to kill one. He threw in a hand grenade, kicked the door open. And again, it doesn't sound real. It sounds like this is an action adventure film. But you can read the citation. I mean, it's just what happened. He was a little nuts. He kept it in the moment.
Mm-hmm. He's awarded the medal in 44.
Yeah.
And how does he end the war?
He was in Croatia. Jack asked him to learn Croatian because he spoke many languages. Italian, French, English, German, Hebrew, and Palestinian Arabic. So I guess to learn one more, Jack just figured he would be able to do that easily. And he went all over the...
By the way, you should identify Jack for us.
Mad Jack Churchill, his commanding officer, who was pretty famous he was a great commander. And
in the British Army.
In the British Army. This is in the commandos, in Commando Number 2. And he went all over trying to find somebody who could teach him Yugoslavian. And he finally found a priest who couldn't speak any of the languages my father spoke, but he spoke Spanish and Russian and other languages, and they somehow worked it out, and he got a dictionary to learn Croatian because he had to find out where he was going to be fighting. And the first time they had to communicate with the Allies, they didn't know if it would work. So my father did the communication, and when they understood, everybody cheered so that they could communicate. It was important. Who knows if the Nazis were listening in or not? Communications were, as you know in the end of this book, intercepts and intelligence was looking for everything they could. But in Albania, actually this is, I think it was Albania or Croatia, he thought he was actually killed. He was shot in the back, and a medic was nearby and said, yeah, you can't live. You have a bullet in your spine. And he was able to walk, and he got up, and he said, okay, I'll lead. And he just kept running till he figured, I'll lead till I die. And that never happened to him. He always survived, and this time he wasn't going to. But somehow he was okay. But then he caught a Nazi sniper, and he told the other side, the Nazis, to surrender. I have your man. And they shot the kid's face off, and they shot part of my dad's leg. He had a big chunk. Actually, I think it was a butt, and they cut a chunk of his leg to heal that part. But he was in Brindisi. His friends in the Commandos number 2 carried him to the beach. And he said he remembered them crying over him, saying, "You did it, Fred. You bought the ticket," meaning you will live. We'll probably die. You may not walk again, but you'll live. And so he went through 26 operations. But 2 weeks after that, his entire unit was wiped out in Albania. The only one who survived was Jack Churchill, his commanding officer. And he survived because the Nazis thought they would have just killed him. They weren't taking prisoners then. They thought they captured Winston Churchill's son. And Jack let them believe it. And he ended up in Hausman-Houston concentration camp. And he was one of the 3 that escaped. You know the movie The Great Escape?
Yes.
Steve McQueen?
Sure.
3 of them, that was based on Jack Churchill.
Really?
It's a true story. They made 100 of them made uniforms, documents, everything, built the tunnels. Half of them got out, 50 of them, 25 or so were killed. The rest were taken back, and 3 made it away, and one was Jack Churchill.
Interesting. Then McQueen was not playing him.
No, they changed, but that was based on that.
I see. All right.
That is much more fiction based on a
Yes.
true story. I really try to make it an autobiography, but since I've had to fill in a lot of blanks.
You call it a novel. It is a historical novel.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, yeah, yeah.
I really think of it as an historical. My father's all true.
Yes.
So to me, it's a historical biography.
Yes.
But I don't want to pretend that I knew every single thing going on there. You know, I spent 6 years, and I've probably read 30, 40 books. It was an overwhelming thing to write this book about a land I had nothing to do with. I've never, been to Germany or Palestine in the 1930s or World War II or the African campaign, North African campaign in World War II. And, to write something, I like to write what I know about.
So for all of his injuries, he survives the war.
Yeah, in fact, he was in love with this Italian woman, Gabriella, whom I met when I was 14. And she must have been in her 50s then. And she was a beautiful woman, but I asked my father why he was so in love with her. And he said, well, you saw her. She's so beautiful and kind, intelligent, funny, sensitive. And I was 14. I saw a woman in her mid-50s, a very attractive woman, but she wasn't a babe to me. But my dad didn't see her any differently. And she wouldn't marry him. And I believe it's because she was 8 years older. He didn't speak Italian that well. He was a war hero, but not in Italy. And they were so poor there. I think she really sacrificed it for him. Because even at 14, I saw them together. And, you could feel the love.
Mm-hmm.
They went off on a walk alone. This was not the highlight of my mother's trip. But my father and mother wanted to show us where they were. And he wanted to see Gabriella again.
And she let him.
Oh, yeah. They went off alone, and she ended up crying, saying that I and my sister could have been her kids. And I think she realized she made a mistake.
I'm sorry.
Gabriella, who went...
By not marrying your father?
Yeah, I think she felt he would fall out of love with her. Women back then from a good family didn't marry a man 8 years younger. And, when he was Jewish from Germany and Palestine and Bologna, there'd be no work for him. And she didn't know my father. She knew him, but she didn't trust him enough. He was a fighter. He would have worked. And he was so talented as an artist, it would have
But she
worked.
couldn't have known that.
She didn't know that. Well, she knew he was talented as an artist, but she couldn't know how talented and what would have happened.
Okay. So it's after the war. Your father's in Palestine.
He was
as it
brokenhearted.
becomes Israel, correct?
Yeah, but he went back in 46. He's brokenhearted. He goes to Palestine. They give him a job as an artist in a kibbutz publishing house, a little one that's just starting up. And he said, you should hire guys who have training. I'm just self-taught. They said, no, you're a war hero. We want you to do it. And he said all these guys trained him, and he got them work. I don't know. He did some stuff, but that little children's book he turned in and then left.
Are you talking about And There Was Evening?
Yes.
Which is an iconic children's book in Israel. And he was the illustrator.
Yeah, it's called The Pearl of Israeli Children Literature. That's why I wrote the book. I don't think I would have if this if Einat Amate hadn't contacted me in 2010 saying...
Explain who she is.
Well, she was a top researcher on search engines for IBM in Israel. She had breast cancer, and when it returned, they fired her. I'm sure they gave another excuse, but that was it. And she was always fascinated about the kibbutz artist, how back then, before Israel, because her father had lived there, and they didn't have shoes, they slept on dirt floors, and they had dugout halls for bomb shelters. And she didn't understand how people could be doing children's books, producing them and doing art at that time. So she was very fascinated by these early kibbutz artists. And then when she wanted to do a study on it. And when she looked into it, her favorite book, the illustrations for And There Were Evening, it was like he didn't exist. They had the name Chaim Hausman, but that was it. And then she was in love with the drawings. They were from her childhood. And she could see the warmth and humor, the animals, and she kind of somehow sensed my father. And actually, she said that year when she was searching for him, she felt he was pushing her. And she went on radio. She said the doors just kept opening. And she was an expert on searching. And she said some mysteries don't want to be answered. This one wanted to be answered. Everywhere she went, there was another door. Things would close, and then something else would open. I mean, it came to the point where David Polanski, who's like the foremost illustrator in Israel, did a whole book based on my father's drawings. And they are brilliant. We don't really know him here, but he's very important there, and those works should be known everywhere. But he was pretty convinced that the Nazi Nazi animator, Hans Fischerkosten, did the illustrations for this book. And he felt this secret, and this should just be left alone, because for the Israeli children classic to be illustrated by the Nazi animator would probably not be a good thing for the book. Fortunately, he was wrong.
And it was your father.
It was my father, but my father used some Fischerkosten stars. He probably found an old Philip light bulb ad that Fischerkosten had done to get lighting, to use the colors, because it works really well. The color, it's night, but he uses blues, and the way he did the stars were like those Fischerkosten stars. He had to have seen them, but they're kind of better than the Fischerkosten stars. They're more alive. And Polanski's point was that, yeah, the Fischerkosten style was better too then. So that's nothing else is copied. So, and Fischerkosten escaped from a Russian concentration camp after the war, after he proved that he was working with the underground the whole time. So, and he escaped over the border right at that time. So he may have had friends in Palestine, and to make up for his work for the Nazis, Polanski believed that he had done these illustrations. Fortunately, something still bothered her. And she kept looking into it, and found over 100 drawings that my father had done. And that was the other point of Polanski, David Polanski, is that an artist, to do those drawings of And There Was Evening, you can't just do them. There are going to be thousands of drawings. An artist has a whole repertoire of work, and there was nothing. The fact was my father just kept throwing everything out. He didn't really save stuff, and in Ben Shaman, he didn't want kids to know he was an artist, that he loved that. He already felt enough of an outsider. So fortunately, she did solve the mystery against all odds. And she, using her story as a present-day backdrop to telling his story of the escape from Germany and his becoming the top commando in Palestine after the war, I felt it was too much not to want to do it. But it was a big undertaking for me. I'd written plays. Oh, and I ghost wrote some books, but...
I understand.
You know, okay.
Where was your father in May of '48 when the State of Israel is declared?
I don't know if he escaped at that point. Again, this is part 2, so I'm giving away. He caught a guy in his place who was going to assassinate him because he wanted to have unity. This was a Jewish guy, and they had a conversation, and he tied him up. And I'm sure the guy could have gotten away, or he felt the guy could have gotten away. But Yvonne Sachs, the one contact, I talked to him also because he knew all about this. He said I brought him to the boat. And again, these guys survived the war together. And after the war, they were the 2 survivors. They were so close. And Yvonne put him on the boat, waved goodbye, and never saw him until 1990s. And I know that was hard for both of them. But my father felt he wasn't going to stop the State of Israel, and he wasn't going to assassinate Ben-Gurion. which some had suggested. But he wasn't going to assassinate a Jew running, the Yishuv at that time. I mean, that just wasn't going to, he couldn't do that. And no Arab seemed to be assassinating the Grand Mufti, and if a Jew assassinated the Grand Mufti, then it would just been more war. So I believe in May of '48, he was already in New York. It may have been just before then or just after then, but it probably was just before then.
Okay. Do you think your father rejoiced when the State of Israel was declared?
I don't think he could quite rejoice because, you have a diaspora of Arabs then, and even Rothschild said the answer to the wandering Jew can't be the wandering Arab. But so he couldn't quite rejoice, but he was a Zionist. He was there to build a home for the Jews and for them to work together with the Arabs. So, what Israel did, he was very proud of. I mean, they have built a great country. There are issues, and that, the fact that there's a wall and not peaceful borders, it's an issue,
So you grow up your father's son. What was he like as a human being, as a father, as a person here living in America?
He was a big character.
Was he?
Yeah. I mean, again, he's very young here, so people change. I mean, I was a skinny little kid. I hated being a skinny little kid. You try to get past that. But he was very outgoing. Maybe he had ADHD. Maybe I do too. The lawyer about the stolen medal in London just said her son has it. And she believes a lot of these heroes have that because they will react. They don't stop and think and question, should I, shouldn't I? You have to just react. But you would have found him full of life. I think you guys would have loved each other.
I bet I would have. Did you love him?
Oh, yeah.
He was a good father?
Yeah, I mean, he was a little crazy. He was the best monster when I was a kid. He was always loving. I mean, I always knew he loved me. I never quite knew why, because like I said, I was a skinny kid. But that's one thing, that's a really important gift to give to a kid. Not everyone has that. And I know I signed a contract with Warner Brothers for a play I did, Becoming Adele, and it was a big hit in LA, got rave reviews. And it kind of got screwed up by this manager that I'd gone with. And my father's, you're not a spring chicken, you can't do this. And I said, and usually he could push my buttons. They say parents can push your buttons because they're the ones who, program them. And this time he wasn't pushing my buttons. It was like, yeah, you're right, I'm old. And, but he cried. He felt so bad because he couldn't help me, because he hadn't saved enough money. And I was doing fine. I mean, okay, I'm not rich, but I was doing fine. But I told him, you've given me the best gift anyone can give. I know you love me. I never questioned that. And that's really important. And even though he didn't do everything sensible, and I haven't done everything sensible. In fact, most of what I've done is backwards and shouldn't have been done that way. But, like he wouldn't have survived it. If he did everything sensible, he would have been dead in probably 39.
A good man.
Yeah.
You've mentioned now a number of times, and it's in this book, your father's medal was stolen.
Yeah.
What's that story? Why would anybody steal that medal? And where was it stolen from? And where does it stand now?
The only thing he asked me on his deathbed that weekend was make sure you get my medals. He was trying to get them, and he thought he'd have 6 months at least. And I assured him I would, but we both knew they were safe. We had talked to the Ministry of Defense. I talked to them in '96, and they said they're much safer there than in your home. And he had they told him the same thing. And I think the person—
His medals were where?
They were in the British Ministry of Defense. They were saved there. No one could get them except my father or his family after his death. We have all his other medals. Lord Michael Ashcroft has his stolen medal now. He bought the entire group of medals from the London Medal Company, even though we have all his other medals. So he should know. He's never responded. All his people and lawyers have responded. And because Scotland Yard refused to declare them stolen, and that's bizarre to me also.
How do you find out they're stolen to begin with?
Well, it was 2014, and I said, it's time I got my father's medals for my nephew and nieces to have them there. Legally, they belong to my stepmom, but she would never sell them either. She's already given the other medals to my sister so that they can be passed on. And she could use the money, but they're that important to us. They're personal. It's not, you don't just sell your dad's medals. They were in the British Ministry of Defense. Now, the one gallantry medal is separate from his other medals, the campaign medals. So the gallantry medal was stolen. That has his name on it, and it even has the wrong name. Jack Churchill, in his citation, said my father legally changed his name. My father never changed the last name of Hausman. He dropped an N to make it, but that was it. He never spelt it Houseman, except when he was in the commandos, because if he was captured by the Nazis, they were all going to say that he was Freddie Hausman, Houseman, a good Christian from Manchester, England. Fortunately, it didn't happen. If he had been captured, that's what they would have said. But he never changed his name, and the medal has Houseman, so they obviously read the citation. My father died in 2006, April of 2006, 2 days before his 85th birthday. 5 months later, the medal appears in an auction. No other provenance ever. It suddenly appears in the Penhall auction. Ron Penhall was a Canadian medal collector from Vancouver, the other side of Canada. And Ron Penhall made it very clear he won't be at the auction of his medals. And he was elderly. He was, I think, in his 80s. So it was probably the perfect medal auction to launder it in. He was from Canada. I've talked to the Penhall family, and I've looked at the collection. He was so fastidious about provenance. There is no way he would sell a medal without giving any indication of where he got it. And the London D&W auction house wouldn't have allowed that. If I try to sell a medal through their auction house, they would want to know where I got it. And yet there's nothing. So I believe there's a crime ring in the British Ministry of Defense stealing these medals and laundering it through D&W and auction house. And I'm hoping with whatever proceeds I raise through this that it all goes to getting all the war heroes medals back, doing a full investigation, finding out how many other medals were taken. I mean, they admit there is no application for my father. There's no address they could have sent it to. Their claim, they have a stamp dated on a dispatch card saying 1948. Well, at the onset of the Arab-Jewish War, would my father apply for his gallantry medal and ignore all his other medals? Is that possible? Would he then sell his gallantry medal without getting any of his other medals? They admit there's no application, and he never applied for any of his medals.
So the bottom line is somebody stole it from the ministry?
What I was told from the British Ministry of Defense is it had to be more than one person. It couldn't just be one.
A ring.
It has to be a ring because one person, there's too many, unless that's not true.
If you know where it is, you can't get it back?
Lord Michael Ashcroft knows that he was ripped off, or should know, if his people have told him, unless they're just getting lawyers on it themselves. But he was ripped off by the London Metal Company. He could easily get his money back. He should send them to jail for, what they did is they took other war heroes' medals and passed them off as my father's. That's despicable. These guys, you don't know what they gave. We don't know how much they gave in those wars, but I know it was a lot. If they got those medals, their names should not be disassociated with them.
And what's the value of this medal? Why is there value to it?
We didn't understand that. With no legal provenance, with the other medals being spurious, Ashcroft bought it for about $120,000. Legally, and now the book it's getting great reaction. As the medal becomes more and more known, it's going to be worth a lot more. That's why we think giving it to someplace like Ben Sham and the youth village, which takes in the orphan kids and it saved my father's life. We think that would be probably a good place for it. Mm-hmm. But again, it's not my decision. It's my nephew and nieces.
Its value is as a collector's item, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it should be something personal for the family. But then you have good collectors like Ron Penhall, who really went out of his way. He went all over the world meeting with the war heroes of their medals. he was a self-made millionaire. He was an inventor. He did something, I think, with water. But he actually went and met with the heroes, and if they needed financial help, he wanted to know why they had to sell their medals. He would help them. So, I mean, that's a really good collector. That's a really, he's showing, respect for these heroes who gave so much for their country and for our freedom. I can't say I've seen that with this case, All I'm seeing is just bizarre greed. I don't know why anyone would want a stolen medal.
Okay. If the story moves on, you've got to come back and take us through the next chapter.
Yeah.
In the meantime, it has been wonderful meeting you. You're a lovely, lovely guy, and you had an extraordinary father. You were very, very lucky and very blessed. My sense is you were a wonderful son to him. And so you brought blessing to your father, so good for you. But thank you, Eric, for being here.
Lord, thank you. You're terrific for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. The book is The Lost Artist. As you can tell, it is just a page-turner. It's a rip-roaring story from beginning to end. And it also gives one a glimpse into what it was like in pre-state Palestine during the war, a story about a remarkable human being. And his son has written The Lost Artist. I recommend it to all of you. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed by Eric on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.